session is on the forest restoration and the carbon market. There has been a surge of interest recently in the carbon market, and that's what makes this session super interesting. And then we open the floor for a discussion. So, over to you guys, please.
There is a concept in theatre called suspension of disbelief, right? So for the period of that movie, you essentially start with a clean slate and try and believe whatever is being shown to you, right? So I'd like all of you to sort of exercise that suspension, the same suspension of disbelief for the next half an hour, and we'll start to try and address a lot of the things, the preconceived notions, the ideas that we all have about each of these things, maybe hopefully during the Q&A. Now, the starting point for us was that there are a lot of great people agree with a lot of the approaches that they've been taking to do restoration work, etc. Theoretically, now they should get paid also for it so that they are equitably compensated, and more people then are incentivized to sort of follow their approach, right? So that's the sort of basic high-level premise. During COVID year, there was a 4% drop on that. That is after having significant lockdowns globally, especially in the manufacturing sector, right? So we are far from decarbonizing, and the reason that there are all of these metrics and policies and all this sort of stuff is that there has been a lot of work that has gone into measuring greenhouse gas emissions. We are not very good at measuring our nature impact, but there is a movement within the financial community right now to start putting quantitative measures on nature-related impact of corporations, especially the private sector enterprises as well, right? And again, a lot of things that didn't come out yesterday in the discussion is, one of it, that could be carbon, biodiversity is another one, water is yet another one, and there could be n number of more of those, and you guys are better placed to sort of know more of those. And what the financial community and the expects is to sort of bring in all of these experts and develop all of these markets to fix the inherent negative externality problem that's built into our accounting system, right? The climate problem, in my view, is primarily driven by our flawed accounting system and our flawed economics, and that's what we need to fix, right? The market structure and all, we'll get to that. Essentially, those are all rules of the game. If you're playing any game, chess, for example, there are certain rules that a bishop can only go diagonally. It can't go straight like a move. So if you've lost your roots, you can only move your bishop diagonally, right? So those are the rules that we need to play with. So we need to understand the market structure dynamics, I would say, like from a moral and ethical compass wise in the right direction, right? So that's the effort sort of that we're coming from. Okay.
So I think Pradyot gave a really good introduction. I will just briefly talk about the market, what the market is, and then how that could relate to work that is being done with the community. So the carbon credit market includes both compliance and voluntary credits. These numbers are slightly dated. So the compliance market is essentially companies trading carbon permits with one another. So if California, China, Japan, India recently announced that they're going to have their own compliance market. And then you have the voluntary market, which is more the offset market, which we're going to talk about more in detail, which is essentially companies buying carbon offsets to offset their own carbon emissions. And for the last decade, this was primarily coming through renewable energy credits, so solar, wind, all of those things. But in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a huge demand for nature-based credits, and then we'll talk about a bunch of other community credits as well. So India has no, like I mentioned, we don't have a compliance market yet, but the voluntary market is growing. Because the voluntary market is so closeted in the sense that most of the transactions that happen are one-on-one transactions, there's not a lot of data, there's not a lot of market rates available. The size of the market is a little hard to estimate, but this 25,000 crores is something that a company called Enking recently said that the market might be, and they're one of the largest traders of carbon credits in the market. So that is just an estimate. It could be way off. And then I'll talk now specifically about how the voluntary market for forestry credit works. And if there are questions specific to this slide, maybe we can take them now as well instead of waiting until the end. So essentially it starts off with forest creation and protection. This can be financed either through government funds or philanthropic donors. In many cases, carbon financiers themselves are financing this, or project developers also put up the money to do this often. So in the case of Farmers for Forest right now, our carbon credit project was developed primarily using philanthropic funding as well as Manrega funds. So in the earlier talk they were mentioning about how they used Manrega, so we have communities that do the same thing. So essentially you create a project, and here the biggest thing is that projects need to be of a certain specific size, and that is primarily because you have so many regulatory requirements in terms of all of the documentation, the GPS mapping, all of the fees that you need to pay, say, to the auditor or to the standard. So typically what we've seen is that if you want a project to be financially viable, the size is somewhere around 800 hectares or more. Of course, there could be smaller projects and there are much larger projects as well. It also depends on the type of project, how many trees, etc., etc. Once you have a project that's created, you can basically choose there's a bunch of different standards and methodologies. So the biggest standard is DERA. You also have other standards called Plan Vivo, the gold standard, etc. So these standards are specific methodologies for what would go into a project, what qualifies as a project, how carbon sequestration is measured, how biodiversity is measured, how community benefits, climate benefits, all of these things are measured. So the next step is to sort of figure out what standard your project would want to be listed on, what methodologies to be used. And then usually what happens is a bunch of different land parcels are aggregated together under a single project developer. This is primarily because, like I said, the costs are so high that if you're a landowner who has, say, 2 hectares of land, it's virtually impossible for you to register your own project on the standard given all of the other requirements. So in a lot of cases what we're seeing is project developers are either non-profits, they could be large sort of FPOs themselves, so farmer producer organizations. We have forest departments that are now project developers. We also have carbon traders that are now aggregating different projects from smaller non-profits and creating their own projects. So the project developer is basically primarily the person who implements the on-ground restoration work, but they may or may not own the credits. And then to sort of audit all of this whole process, you have auditors. These auditors are empaneled by the standards. So for example, Vera has its own set of auditors, Plan Vivo has another set of auditors, and the auditor essentially makes sure that you are meeting all of the methodology set by the standard, and they also calculate the carbon sequester. So as a project developer, you give them sort of like an ex-ante calculation, that this is how much I think my project is sequestering, and then you provide information for why you think that number is accurate, and then the auditor essentially verifies it. In terms of outcomes, of course, carbon sequestration is the primary outcome. But you now have standards like in Vera you have the climate community and biodiversity standard, or you have the sustainable development standard. So they also measure other outcomes which could be clean livelihoods or supplemental income to the communities, improved biodiversity, wildlife, soil health, all of these other things. So Pradyot, do you want to add anything here, or if we have any specific questions for how this works, we can take that. Okay, a lot of questions.
So this is in terms of just clearing the ground for folks who have dealt with the RED and RED+ systems earlier, and now this carbon credits, and I think some people are not able to see the differences. So one question that arises is that we have, for example, the community forest rights under the Forest Rights Act. So now can the, and it's existing carbon, so it can also come under avoided deforestation and so on. But it could also be, if you meet the criteria that Krutika mentioned about 800 hectares contiguous, many of the community forests rights which have been conferred would qualify. And would carbon credits apply to conservation of community forests under the Forest Rights Act? That's one. The second thing is that if you see the money that's actually now available, whatever is left of the Kanha PT, a lot of it has gone here and there. But whatever is left is what is being now put into the current budget in the mangrove restoration and a few other forest restoration type of schemes. Now, would the, if you take the area which is, whenever some forest is diverted, even if you take the best forest in India, 1 hectare of that is cleared, all you have to really pay is the price of like a small 2-bedroom apartment in the outskirts of some, not even a metropolitan town, and you have to plant some certain number of trees far away somewhere, and you get away with it. So can the opportunity cost of lost carbon credits through this market help enhance in some sense that amount? I mean, these are just two things that take money.
Yeah. The thing is that the cost of going through this process of registration is a certain number. And so it only makes sense for you to go register your project if the benefits outweigh those costs, or at least the benefits at least cover those, right? And that's how this sort of threshold of certain number is determined. So if that cost can come down to 0, theoretically you can, even if you're planting 1 tree, you can claim credits on that, and you should be awarded for that, because that's the whole point of these markets. B, the CFR and all of these things are actually a lot more complicated because of there are 2 primary sort of fields that deal with such issues. One is the legal, and the second is policy. Right? So there is high degree of ambiguity in both the legality of these markets, given that in India there is no defined carbon market yet, and none of the previous Indian laws, Forest Act, Wildlife Conservation Act, etc., even think of these ecosystem markets, so they are completely silent on it. And there are no very clear global rules at UN level which can get applied to, let's say, all the countries that are ratifying these treaties that we signed it, right? Because at the end of the day, all individual countries will work with their own sovereign laws as opposed to go by UN sort of international laws, right? So the whole sort of legislative and the policy are the 2 aspects to deal with that. And there are certain ways a lot of people are going through that. One of the routes Krutika's organization are actually also trying to sort of deal with within that, so I'll let her speak about some of those nuances. My sense is that it is still a highly complicated subject to sort of think about avoided deforestation, existing carbon stocks, and monetization of common lands, forest lands through these markets. Right. So that is, the view that we have taken is that we want to stay clear of those right now, given that we don't have the sort of firepower to actually start influencing a lot of these issues at a policy level.
In a situation where Gram Sabhas are able to sell carbon, how they're selling bamboo or Tendua Mawa right now. But the tricky part there is that the land on record belongs to the forest department. Communities have harvesting rights and management rights for non-timber forest produce or minor forest produce. So one of the ways that we're trying to go about this at the policy level is to see if carbon can be defined as minor forest produce. Of course, like Pradyot was saying, because this is so new and there's a lot of confusion or a lack of clarity even from the government's end for what this would mean. especially since, at least in Maharashtra, I'm talking only about the Maharashtra case, there is a lot of CFR that's been given out, right? Like just in Gadchiroli, there's 5 lakh hectares. So whatever decision is taken on this, and the government's, we submitted something to the government nearly 2 years ago, and there's still back and forth happening. But whatever decision is taken on this will have a lot of repercussions in terms of revenue and carbon and NDCs and all of those things. So like Pradyot was saying, that it will take some time, but I think there's definitely potential for carbon and CFR which we explore.
Yeah, my name is Vipul Gupta. Are we looking at some way where this man could also benefit? You know, that we had a very famous Prime Minister in this country who officially said, 1 रुपया खर्चा करते हैं तो किसान तक 10 पैसा मिलता है. आप लोगों के 1 रुपये में वो किसान तक 10 पैसा भी आएगा क्या नहीं आएगा, इसके बारे में कुछ सोच रहा है क्या? That's my question.
My sense is that this is sort of like the early stages of, say, the handicrafts market or the agriculture market or the bamboo market, where right now that awareness or knowledge is not there, so you need a lot of middlemen. But eventually the idea, and that's what we're trying to do, is that the communities themselves are trained to do this, right? Because it's not rocket science. You need to GIS map your land, you need to quantify carbon stocks, you need to track that through satellite or drone data on a regular basis. So this is something that the community can very easily be trained to do. The problem is that because the market is at such an early stage right now, there aren't a lot of people who know this, right? Like even as a non-profit, we face the same issues that you're talking about. We didn't understand the market. There were a lot of people who were trying to kind of get us on their projects, not pass on as many benefits to us, not give us as much money, all of those things. So we essentially put that time in to understand all of this and develop those capacities in-house. And now the idea is you can do this for the communities as well. So you're absolutely right that right now there is a lot of people who are in it to just make money, but it doesn't have to be that way.
So one of the things to sort of come to that, add also is from an investor standpoint, right? This analogy holds true, and there is a very clear incentive alignment for them also, that the most amount of money that they're spending is not going to a lot of these intermediaries, which is unproductive spend from their point. How can you quantify that, and then how can that track over a period of time? And that defines quality and hence the price of that they are investing in as well. Some registries like Mansi has specific 60% or more needs to go to the and they want to receive that qualification when the project comes.